This podcast is brought to you by B2B Better. Most B2B podcasts rack up downloads, but they never move the needle on pipeline. At B2B Better, we build own media systems that sales teams actually use to close deals. We've helped companies turn their podcasts into revenue engines, shortening sales cycles, improving outbound reply rates, and directly influencing millions in pipeline. So if you're tired of content that looks good on paper, but doesn't drive business results, visit b2b-better.com to see how we do it differently. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Pipe Dream, and today we are doing something a little bit different. I wanted to talk about an article that landed in my feed recently. It was written by Paul Rei, who is a digital communications leader, and it was published on Inc.com at the end of February. And the headline was this: "The corporate podcast bubble is about to burst." And look, I'm someone who runs a business built entirely on the premise that podcasting works for B2B companies. I'd be doing you a disservice if I just scrolled past it. I'm going to share Paul's arguments as fairly as I can, because frankly, some of them are worth hearing. And then I want to offer a different perspective, not to be combative, but just to add what I think is missing from the conversation. Here we go. So the first thing I want to say is that Paul's piece is well researched. He opens with something called the 60% efficiency gap, and he cites this meta-analysis from Ghent University that found that the average adult reads nonfiction at around 238 words per minute, while the average speaking pace, the speed of every podcast, sits at 150 words per minute. His point is pretty simple. Audio is slower and therefore is less efficient. He then starts talking about comprehension, and he cites this 2010 study from the Journal of Teaching of Psychology, where students listen to audio versions of their course material and they perform significantly worse on comprehension quizzes than those who read the same content as text. His third argument is about what he calls the loss of agency. With text, you can search, skim, quote, and copy. You can't control F an audio file. You can't scan a 45-minute episode for that one insight that you actually need. Finally, Paul makes the case that the investment is hard to justify. Production costs are significant, completion rates can be low, and the industry's own attempts to measure ROI are, in his words, like trying to hold a moonbeam in your hand. I want to be clear, Paul isn't saying that podcasting has no use cases whatsoever. He acknowledges that in moments of genuine emotional weight, a face and a voice matter. He's making a more specific argument that as a default content format for corporate comms, the evidence just isn't there. On the Vanity project problem, he's right. A lot of corporate podcasts exist because someone thought it would be good for the brand, with no clear commercial purpose and no real strategy behind them. That's a fair criticism, and one I'd make myself. But here's where I think the article goes wrong. It's asking the complete wrong question. Measuring audio against text on speed and comprehension assumes that they're competing for the same moment of attention, and that's just not how most people consume podcasts. The person listening to an episode is on a commute, they're in the gym, they're doing the school run. That's not time that they're going to spend reading a white paper. Audio fits around your life in a way that text simply can't. A piece of content consumed at 150 words per minute beats one that never gets opened. On the comprehension point, I gently push back on the study. Comparing students processing dense academic course material in audio format against those reading the same content as text, of course, text is going to win there. But that tells us nothing about thought leadership content that's been built specifically for the medium. The best corporate podcasts aren't recorded white papers. They're conversational, they're editorial, they're engaging. Applying a study about textbook audio to well-produced B2B content is a category error. And on the loss of agency argument, I think it simply hasn't kept pace of where the industry is. Tools like Descript mean that any podcast worth its salt is producing transcripts in seconds. Shows like Lenny's podcast, 20VC, and many other B2B podcasts that we all know and love, they publish full edited transcripts and companion blog posts alongside every episode on their website. That problem is solved. It just requires a distribution strategy that goes beyond uploading to Spotify. Honestly, the thing I keep coming back to is this. Paul's article evaluates podcasting as a content format. Is audio better than text for transferring information? And through that lens, text probably does win on efficiency. But that's not how we think about podcasting at B2B Better. And it's not how the brands generating real commercial returns from their podcasts think about it either. In a services business, your people and your point of view are your biggest differentiators. No competitor can replicate your team's expertise, their perspective, and their personality. A video podcast is the most powerful vehicle that I've found for putting both of those things in front of the right buyers consistently and at scale. It's not a piece of content, it's a platform. The transcript, the blog post, the short form clips, the sales asset, those all come off the back of it. The brands that we work with who are generating real returns aren't even measuring downloads. They're asking, how does this podcast open doors with cold prospects? How does it nurture relationships with warm ones? And how does it give their sales team something genuinely valuable to put in front of a buyer? We've worked with organizations that have attributed over £250,000 in closed won revenue to their podcast tracked in HubSpot. That's not a vanity metric. That is pipeline. So is the corporate podcast bubble about to burst? For the brands doing it badly, with no strategy, no commercial purpose, and no real measure of success, probably. And if it does, I won't mourn that. But for the brands that are treating it as a full funnel platform that puts their people and their point of view at the heart of their marketing and their sales strategy, I think the opportunity is bigger than it's ever been. Paul, if you're listening to this episode, the invitation to come onto Pipe Dream and debate this with me is genuinely open. Come on the show. I'd love to have this conversation properly. And if you've got a view on this, I'd be really interested to hear it. Drop me a message, leave a comment, or find me on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next one.